Okay, let's do this. Where do I start with FF7? To be fully honest and get straight to the point, the game has impacted me a lot growing up, as an artist, as a storyteller, and as a musician. It's impacted me in just about as much as many of the movies I watched growing up, like Star Wars or the Raimi Spider-Man movies or Indiana Jones. FF7 was like watching a film series for me, and a really damn good one at that, too. The opening sequence of FF7 is one that is permanently ingrained in my brain forever. The opening cutscene immediately puts you into the action and sets up the city you'll be traversing for the tutorial. Just for the goddamn tutorial! That's the other thing about FF7. It's the sheer scope of it. From a storytelling perspective, FF7 does an incredible job setting up and then delivering on each aspect of the world it brings into play. Almost every question the player raises, the game has an answer to it. And even then, sometimes it has more than just an answer. Sometimes it feels are 3 encyclopedias worth of an answer, and it's that kind of planning and forethought, and it's just the world building. It fleshes out this world and makes it feel so big, which is building on top of its already humongous map. All this isn't even to mention that the opposition you face in the game is by one of the greatest villains in a video game, let alone just media in the past 50 years in my opinion. The main villain, Sephiroth, is a very complex character. He's a character who you can feel the weight and motivation behind every single action he makes, and yet he leaves you with questions at almost every single encounter. The first introduction to him you have is a literal 7-foot-long sword sticking out of the man who the game has been saying is the antagonist, just out of his back. And all that can be said by any of the witnesses to it is that he's back. All that is said is that Sephiroth is back. This man is that terrifying. If I don't know what's a more perfect setup for Sephiroth as a villain, then I don't know what else could potentially fill that in. His backstory then goes and fills in even more detail, and it raises the stakes even higher, with, factors like Genova in play. And Genova, who is a literal extraterrestrial entity whose entire goal is devouring planets like a sort of Galactus who's got tits. Yeah, she's basically Sephiroth's mom. And this drives Sephiroth mad, and leads to this man who, straight up many look up to, and who then had an entire, part of the military just based around becoming a sociopathic murderer who literally tries to end the fucking world. If those aren't stakes and motivation, then I don't know what else could be. And it's these things that make Sephiroth a truly interesting and compelling villain. And his motivations make a lot of sense. He's a character who's been lied to his entire life by everyone he's ever trusted. And as such, he starts thinking that humanity is a blight to be destroyed. And this arc stands completely juxtaposed to the protagonist of the story, Cloud. Cloud, without diving too much into his story, is a really interesting character who, his whole thing is the fact that his arc is in juxtaposition to Sephiroth in that it's a redemption of humanity. And it's about the good of the world. Cloud, at the start of FF7, is in a reverse situation to Sephiroth, whereas Sephiroth was lied to by others for their own selfish goals. Cloud was lying to the world and himself about who he is. Cloud is also a broken man, with trauma having been wrought upon his life, and as such he forms this persona to cope. To be honest, it's not unlike a lot of people in the real world who've gone through traumatic experiences and now they become someone new to cope with it themselves. And the game does an incredible and brilliant job referring to this and foreshadowing it, even as early as some of your first encounters with Tifa, who's a woman who is Cloud's closest tether to the man he was. And ultimately she's the one who saves him and makes Cloud wholly himself again. Tifa shows Cloud kindness and compassion in an otherwise bitter world, and no one else has done that to him. Truthfully, that's what the entire party does for each other. They may all have differing motivations, but they all show compassion and kindness and love for one another, and it brings them all together. And that's one of the main themes of Final Fantasy VII. It's a game about the goodness of humanity, and that's really compelling. It's a compelling theme that's been used time and time again, but Final Fantasy VII does it so beautifully that it feels like something brand new and never seen before. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I haven't even talked about the absolute best girl that is Aerith. I swear you can call me Zack Fair, because yes, I simp hard for that girl, and I am willing to die on this hill. And to be fully honest, I say this all as someone who's never even fully played the game the whole way through. Yeah, you heard me right. Never the whole way through. And to fully understand why, you have to hear a bit about my backstory with the game. I grew up in a small town in the north central West Virginia. For consoles as a kid, all I had was a Wii, a PS2, and Atari 2600, which was at my grandparents', and any game I could emulate on my PC. So, for me, knowing that even though the PS2 was backwards compatible, it was tricky because the only game store I really had was a GameStop, and they most definitely didn't have a PlayStation 1 copy that I could use of FF7. In fact, even then, after I got my copy of FF7 in 2014 at a con, I still didn't have a memory card, and there was no really good way for me to play the game, so I couldn't play it all the way through. Thankfully, that was around the same time that I found Max on YouTube. For those of you who don't know who I'm talking about, Max is Maximilian Dood, a YouTuber and Twitch streamer who plays fighting games and who's also one of the biggest Final Fantasy VII fans I know around. I found Max around this time, and I was instantly hooked by anything Final Fantasy VII related he would put out on his YouTube. At the time, I was so crazy for Final Fantasy VII that I just wanted to play it so badly, and I never could get through Midgar. So, when Max eventually did a full playthrough, I naturally watched the whole thing. I live vicariously through Max, enjoying every part of the game and loving every moment. And that was how I grew up with it. For me, I never could play the game. It wasn't until I eventually got a PS1 card that I could get through Midgar, and I eventually left and I stepped out into the world for my first time. It was interesting. Also, my cat's here. But I think the insane thing to me is for someone like myself who's never played the game the whole way through, and yet it still had this kind of impact. So, I guess in a sense, thank you, Max. Thank you for turning me into the FF7 fan I am today, because I don't know what game would be my favorite if it wasn't Final Fantasy VII. And honestly, I think at that point this video's gone on long enough, just for a quick impromptu video. I'd love to just gush and go on and on about Nobuo Uematsu's score for Final Fantasy VII, because it is one of my favorite soundtracks ever. And I'd love to talk about Tetsuya Nomura's top-notch character design, which has influenced my artistic style so much. But I'd rather save those for another day. In short, Final Fantasy VII is a game that means a lot to me. It's so important to me that I even made it that little offline banner that you can have on Twitch. And it honestly still brings me to tears. I started playing it on stream a few weeks ago. It's like a first full playthrough kind of thing. And to be honest, I kind of had to stop early. A lot earlier than I wanted to. And it was because I couldn't get through it. I was crying. I was sitting there in the church, and I was crying. So I eventually got out, and I got to the nearest save point of the church, and I just kind of had to call the stream, because I was so emotional. It's incredible to think that it turns 25 years old today, and it's still such a timeless game that's so beautiful and well executed. But I think with that, I've gushed enough about it today. And so as such, this is Finn, signing off for now.